another beef after like Volksgeist. I think you did a video on the collapse of the Joe Budden podcast, right? Now, one of the main criticisms from your fans was they felt like you were too hard on Rory and Mal. So, well, one, do you feel like you were too hard on Rory and Mal during that video?
So I think a big reason people have an issue with that, and I'm not ducking any criticism. You know, a lot of the criticism, I think you put it very politely, but I think what a lot of people were saying that I was an academics dick rider. That's what they were saying. They were saying I was a meat riding academics. And look, I'll be honest, I'm a huge academics fan, so that probably did create a little bit of bias in that project. I'm not going to lie to you. You know, when academics was spinning the block on those guys and saying he was smoking on Rory Pack, I was tuning into every single one of those. But at the same time, I think that actually when I did my research into that video, I felt that actually it was very clear that there was this sort of rift between academics and, as he called them, the Stooges, you know, Rory and Mal, who essentially like they kind of had this beef going on with academics, but they sort of they sort of failed to realize that like academics had a genuine relationship with Joe Budden, right? Who essentially, once again, this was the whole crux of that documentary. Joe was the boss. It's the Joe Budden podcast. Like Rory and Mal, there was a period when the podcast didn't have a name. It was like a podcast with no name or something. We'll name this podcast later. And it became the Joe Budden podcast. And it was the Joe Budden podcast. It wasn't the Rory and Mal podcast. It was the Joe Budden podcast. And Joe Budden had a relationship and a storied history with DJ Academics, with Everyday Struggle, the show that they had, which really was a very, very big, significant platform in the hip hop culture. And so for Rory and Mal to kind of go so hard on this behind the scenes beef with academics, and particularly, you know, I know academics was really upset and hurt by the fact that, you know, Rory turned up to his house and put like a threatening letter into his mailbox. And I personally, like, I thought that was wrong. You know, I feel like this is entertainment. I would be very upset if someone did that to me. I didn't think that was cool. You know, I kind of make fun of it in the video, sort of like Rory kind of on this, trying to be on some mafiosa, some Tony Soprano shit. But like, you're all in the media game. So I felt like they were wrong for that. I felt like they played the bad hand. And I know a lot of people call me biased. And I probably am a little bit biased because I like academics. And, you know, I made that video before I really knew him personally. But that was just the way I see it. You know, my videos, I kind of call it like I see it. Whether it's, you know, my opinion that King Von is a serial killer or that, you know, Joe Budden was in the right, even though he is a very abrasive personality. Like, you know, I call it how I see it. And I go through all the research and all the facts. And, you know, I do give my opinion in the video. At the end of the day, it's history, but it's also is my opinion, and it's colored by my opinion. And I'm human, man. I've got a bias. You know, I've got an angle. I've got people that I like more than other people. And that is what it is, man. But I just try and be honest.
Yeah. And who do you blame, though? So, obviously, and you said and you blame Rory and Mal for the collapse of the Joe Budden podcast, but why do you blame them?
Well, I felt like if you trace it back, there were examples. I mean, I'm kind of, it's been a few years since I made that video, so there's a lot of stuff I forgot. But there were like examples of like other people that were on the Joe Budden show way back when there were other hosts and other people involved. I think is it Marissa? I don't want to get it wrong, but obviously there was a female co-host involved in the early days, and then like they kind of got canned, and there was fallout, and it was kind of like I felt like Rory and Mal didn't really take stock of the fact that like the same shit that could happen to them. They were kind of laughing and egging it on when it was going on, but like, you know, it was very clear that it was Joe's show, that people could get fired at any minute. They let the show be renamed the Joe Budden podcast. And then when it kind of came to it, you know, we all know that when everything did collapse and Joe was saying, why aren't my co-hosts turning up for work? Like, why aren't they here to pod? I'm here to pod. Where are the co-hosts? And, you know, there was that period when we all know the show fell apart when Rory and Mal didn't show up to the pod. And that's when Joe, you know, started getting Ish and Ice involved, because the show does have to go on. It's the Joe Budden podcast. That shit needs to go on. And, you know what I'm saying? The video is called The Collapse of the Joe Budden Podcast, but Joe's out here moving strong still to this day. And, you know, salute to Joe. Like, obviously he was the number one entry in the complex, the very biased hip-hop power players list. But it's facts, you know, Joe's impact on the culture is undeniable. And I think Rory and Mal, you know, I don't have an issue with those guys, and I respect what they're doing, and I think they've done really well to kind of get their own thing going. But I think they were naive to kind of think that their position was more secure than it was on that show.